Hello and welcome to Two Mutables in a Pod. This podcast weaves our life experience with our love for astrology, alternative healing, and Black culture. My name is Mimi.
And my name is Emily, and we are your hosts. And welcome to the Two Mutables in a Pod podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 3. Have I been here before? This is an episode inspired by many conversations with Emily about past lives. I think we've both had various experiences in different ways, so we thought we'd explore this topic in this episode. So I wanted to start off by talking about past lives, reincarnation, and soul contracts, because I think they have a slight difference. So for me, a past life is linked to you, your experiences, things that you might have navigated through different lifetimes, through different timelines. But you are the main factor, or your soul is the main factor that, I don't know how to describe it, but your essence sort of carries through across decades, for example. Whereas reincarnation can be your soul or your essence going into a family member, going into an animal, a pet, going into nature. Reincarnation kind of expands that description of from a human to human vessel to a human to another kind of energetic vessel, if you like. And then we get into soul contracts. And I think Emily and I have spoken about soul contracts many, many times. And this is the agreement that you have with another person. So kind of linked to past lives where you and another soul might have met, say, in the 30s, had an experience and decided to meet up again in the noughties. That is your soul having an agreement or a contract with another individual, knowing that you'll find each other at that point in time. So with that, I wanted to kind of open up the floor to ask Emily if you believe in past lives. Now, I will land this for you a little bit because this was inspired by, I was watching a medium online and she was saying that she doesn't believe in past lives. And I found it really interesting the way that she described it, because you would think, being a medium or accessing those other realms, that you would naturally have an agreement or a knowing of past lives. But the way that she framed it was, she doesn't agree with past lives because if past lives existed, how is it possible that she can see deceased loved ones? Because her form of mediumship, she can see humans or see souls that have passed. So for her, she's like, it can't be a past life experience because this is within this lifetime. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And then that kind of threw me a little bit, because I very much believe in past lives. I think I've had many, many signs, many encounters that have given me that knowing, even as simple as deja vu. I think that is a form of your past life, kind of like saying, hi, like, remember us? So it kind of threw me into a bit of reflection, thinking, where do I sit with past lives? So yeah, I thought I'd kind of ask you, Emily, what do you think about past lives?
I think even though, not being devil's advocate, but technically I am, even though she is referencing the fact that she is seeing these people in this lifetime, who's to say that that also can't extend to the past life? However, again, obviously she probably has a deeper explanation for that. For myself, I do believe in past life connections. I do think they are real things. I think there are certain people, as you mentioned, there are different forms in which that can show up in, aka reincarnation, deja vu, and all these other things that make up this umbrella. But I do believe that some of us have walked and crossed paths with certain people in previous lifetimes. And I do think that it is something that influences our present lifetime too. So, yes.
Outside of like the connection side of things, do you think that you've had past lives before without kind of interacting with another soul, just like you and yourself?
Let me think. Let me think about that. I would 100% say that there are certain activities outside of like partnerships with others, as you've asked. I think there are certain activities, certain thoughts, certain things and feelings, I would say, that give that all. I feel like I've done this before, or there's a reason why it's a natural thing to me. Yes. Let me rely on
Mm,
the second explanation. There are certain things which I might not be an expert in the field, but I might dabble and give it a shot and give it a try. But there's just this knowing that, no, man, like this isn't knowledge that I've acquired from any textbook, from any school, or any other individual. This is something that is innately within me that I possess, and it's coming to me naturally. So yes, I do think there are certain things, aka like when I'm cooking, I know that I've always had this. I mean, outside of the Astro, my 10th house being ruled, I've got Vesta and Palace there, which are the
mhm,
asteroids that deal with like nurturing and healing others. And I've always felt that when I make food or when I'm giving food to other people, it's something that is nourishing the body, but on an, and like on an, I want to say on a cellular level, should I say. And
mm,
when I'm preparing these things, it's not that I've, sat there and read a cookbook or anything, but these are things that just are pulling up and coming to me quite quickly. So I would definitely say that yes, like there are certain activities, certain tasks, certain hobbies even. Yeah, hobbies, aka activities that fall within that, I think, thought and process of like, yeah, this is something that I've done before. Even with braiding, I'm gonna say, like there's a knowing that no, this isn't info that I've practiced on a few dolls growing up, but I know that I've always had this feeling that there's somebody within the bloodline who would have had this gift and skill, and that's from a past life and something that's been passed. So yeah, I do agree with that.
That's really interesting because I think for me, the activities is actually like a secondary thought.
Okay.
How I entered into past life work was through fears, which is something I think we're going to go on to. But I have this irrational, like completely irrational fear about dogs. But then it also extends to most animals. And for me, I couldn't figure out why, because nothing had happened in this lifetime. I'd gone and done hypnotherapy, couldn't find a way to kind of heal it. And it was only when I kind of came into awareness of past lives that I've experienced, I understood, oh, the fear is very valid because of some of the things I've endured because of dogs or because of animals. So, like things like being tortured and things like that, and being kind of, yeah, kept in not so great circumstances, as if I was treated like a dog. And so that fear is something that made me kind of think, has this happened before in any kind of lifetime? Even though I had no language for it, I didn't understand it. But that curiosity, because I wanted to heal it, that curiosity made me kind of go down the past lives route. So I would say I do believe in it because I feel that fear till this day.
And
Yeah.
as you were saying, like the curiosity,
Mm.
and I think curiosity of memory as well, sparking up memories, because I think, as you said, there was that fear, but it's a very valid fear. Going through the therapies that you went through to, venture down as to why that stemmed for you,
Yeah.
I think one thing that I keep coming back to, even I think the linking point is like a past memory. Like these are memories, although we might not necessarily know and process them as that when we're in the experience or we're having these feelings or thoughts come up for us. I do think like the root of activities, the root of, irrational fears or fears that are really real and valid to you, I think they all stem through memories of some sort trying to come back through and to remind you of these past lives. So I do think they are very real and valid. But obviously, again, not all of us are always going to agree on this stuff. And I think it's interesting to hear different perspectives on that.
Definitely. Just going back, because you mentioned about connection. What does it feel like for you, or have you ever had that kind of past life recollection, or do you know what I mean, like that spark?
You know what, when I was when I was
Mhm.
looking and just thinking about when you were just reading this out, I want to say, whilst we typically kind of hear about the fact that there is that sense of familiarity that you feel initially. When I think about some of my deepest connections sometimes, and this is not always the case, but just in some of the ones that I can think of, there hasn't initially always instantly always been that connection per se. For some
Oh,
have been, and I will put my hands up and say that, where it feels like I know you, like I recognize you from somewhere, but I can't pin my finger as to where I know you from, but I know you from, and it's not like I can't, the memory's hazy, it's quite foggy. You can't pinpoint where specifically. And I've had that very strong with one individual. But with the others, it's like, I want to say, well, I know I want to come on to this a bit later on, but I can see how destiny and fate and encounters being at the same place at the same time, or, events unfolding where you are crossing paths because you're in a certain location, space together. But
yeah.
they're not necessarily being that instant recognition in the beginning. But as the connection unravels, it's like, no, it feels familiar. So I do think familiarity
Mm.
is a key component here. It might not always be instant, but I've had cases where it has felt instant. And then I've had cases where over time, I can see why we are bonded so deeply because it feels like I am at home. Those, yeah, when I look at the polarizing opposite ends, I've had two instances, but I think, like I say, the bridge for me stems from feeling at home. Like that when I see you, when we're
Yeah.
doing things together, it's like, have we done this before? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's so deeply within, like I think when I think about the individuals, and typically even with friendships, I think this has
Mm.
occurred, but I'm speaking more so from the romantic end of things. When I've had these encounters, and there's three people that come to mind, you can tell that in a normal way we have nothing aligned. Like we would never have crossed paths had it not been for destiny and fate. And secondly, I think the way things have unraveled with these connections too, it is quite, yeah, it feels at home. Let me sum up there before I start getting my
Mm.
feelings. But how about yourself? Have
Mm.
you encountered people, connections, romantic or non-romantic, where you have felt that no, man, we are repeating a script here. We've done this. This person is feeling like I know you from before.
Yeah.
Please do share.
I was really trying to differentiate this feeling because, and maybe I need to say it out loud and maybe a question will come, but I've had two experiences that really stand out. One, a friendship where I met them through another person, but when I met this friend, this person who became a friend, instantly I said, no, you're meant for me. Like there was something in my soul that was like, you are like, we are bonded. Don't know what it is, but there's something about our paths that feels so aligned. But
Hmm.
I wouldn't classify that as a past life connection. I would classify that as destiny and fate, as you said, and almost like a part of our future agreement was to walk life together side by side, um, for as long as we've agreed to. It still had that sense of comfort, that sense of home, but just two pieces of a puzzle, and I just felt instantly like, okay, this is my person type of thing. But in a romantic sense, I felt that looking into someone's eyes and being like, I've seen this, I've seen you before, I've seen this pair of eyes before. They had the same feeling, and it was very much just a grounding and anchoring into one another's energy, and of, oh, okay, we're doing this again type of thing. And it was very settled, very calm, and I knew that was from a past life experience
Hmm.
that later got confirmed through like past life regression therapies and stuff like that that I've done.
Okay.
I couldn't, I don't know how to classify the first example because it doesn't feel past lives. Maybe it's more soul contracts, I guess, and that knowing of we have some sort of a future together, and now we're just letting it open up and unfold.
I mean,
Yeah.
as trying to not get philosophical here, but I feel that it's bound to happen. But one thing I did want to say is that when you describe the first connection, to me it screams soul.
Mm,
It screams soulmate. So, but then it also made me think: can past life and
mm,
soul connections intercede and like overlap each other, or are they two inseparable things that just don't mix and like they don't go together? So that's one question that I wanted to pose. And then the second one, where you mentioned just knowing and having that recognition that I have seen you before, I have known you before. It made me think about how when we come back onto this earth, you spoke about
mm,
reincarnation quite early on, and that can take place in different forms of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the human form. It could be, in place of things, animals, immovable things, etc. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking about how when we are born, we don't necessarily always hold the memories of past lives. And essentially, as we grow and develop, and we get older and we go through experiences, those memories, fragmented although they might be, they do come back to us in gradual processes. And I think, perhaps that is one of the indicators with a past life connection, that fragmented memories might start to trickle through,
mm,
even if you don't have the full and whole picture in the initial encounter when you cross paths. But when I was listening to you speak about the first connection, I did it more so spoke to me about the soul nature
yeah.
of that contract and that connection that you have with that individual. But then it also made me think about, well, maybe it is possible for things to overlap and intercede and intertwine with each other. Like perhaps maybe a past life connection can also have elements of it being a soul connection too. So I'd love to know what you think about that and whether that's possible or not really.
Mm. I'm really having to think about this because right now I would say that it is possible for past life connections to have some sort of a soul contract or soul agreement,
Hmm.
but it's it's not necessary. It can be positive, it can be negative. It can roll on for a lifetime, it can end at a certain point. And
Hmm.
I think that's the thing that we are not always aware of when we're in it. I'll give another example. I feel like I've done many lifetimes with my mum, but I feel that's past life and that's soul contract. Um, but it doesn't necessarily feel good, but it's still an agreement that's in place somehow. Um, I think, yeah, it's a big question because I could argue it both ways.
You speaking about your mother, and although, as you mentioned, you have had previous lifetimes, you
Mm,
are also of the knowledge, and you have the awareness that this is also a soul contract to some extent, but it doesn't feel nice. And do you feel that when you have these instances where both elements are present, can that propel you into the path of destiny and forward movement? Because again, as we're speaking with as you were speaking about soul contracts, and you're speaking about some of them not entirely always being in your best interest. Some of them
mm,
might be short term, some of them might be longer term, and some of them
mm,
might move you forward into a path that you need to take. Do you
yeah.
believe that having these two polarizing ends almost forces the individual more times or more often times than not to follow and pursue a path that requires them leaving behind the past life? Or can they embody and bring the past life across into the present, with that forward future soul contract too?
Yeah. See, I think you do bring your past life with you,
Mhm,
even if it's just from the basis of knowledge and understanding. I think it's important to have access to that without it kind of dictating or influencing the progression of how the soul is trying to evolve. So, because in some ways, I believe if we have had past lives before, we have chosen to come here again, maybe to do something slightly differently, to make a different choice, to have a different outcome, to have different experiences. So, by virtue, some things do need to be shed or do need to be released. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it copy and paste over several lifetimes? I don't think that makes sense to me personally. So, I think there's always the ethos or the idea of some sort of evolution or growth However, not all parties do that, or it doesn't always kind of go in that direction. And then that's how that soul contract can be broken, I guess.
Okay, I'm following. When you said that growth, the evolving of the soul and some
Mm,
contract, and it's true, some contracts, I think, as you're mentioning, it's a union, I guess. So one party, I think both parties need to be on board. And if that isn't the case, then yes, I understand how that person might need to, you know, depart and proceed
yeah,
forward with what destiny has in store for them.
yeah. But it's weird because like for many years, I've always only thought of soul contracts from like a fulfillment, destiny, purpose lens rather than romantic or friendship lens. So
Okay.
years ago, uh, how long? Maybe like 6, 7 years ago, I had a vision where me and my soul family, we were blue beings, and I don't know if I believe in blue beings, but we were all blue, and we stepped up to like a mantelpiece, and we were all signing this contract, but it was we were signing it together, and the symbolism was having a joint mission, a joint purpose in life. So all of us had incarnated as a family group to
Okay.
achieve something to better our bloodline and then to better the world. So for me personally, I've always viewed soul contracts from what is the group mission, what's the collective mission here, as opposed to what's the partnership mission or the one on one. It's that again, that collective identity over individual identity.
If you don't mind me asking, okay, so here's another, it's not even devil's advocate, but this has just sprung into my mind as you were speaking. So do you believe that, as you're saying, your understanding of soul union, soul, did you say contracts, soul contracts, and anything that's to do with, like-minded people being in a similar path for the greater good, do you feel that your nodes play a role on that axis, or do you feel that's because of some of your like your Venus placements, or just like your beliefs that I would say centered in your Aquarian house that stand up for these things quite passionately, and that's how you influence your take on soul contracts?
Maybe I think as generally as a person, romance isn't high priority. So maybe like it is more about what are we doing here for the betterment of other people? Like how are we growing and evolving as a unit? I think I've said before, as a group, as opposed to yeah, just that one to one kind of thing. But then I also count my friendships in the soul family kind of arena. I guess something that you also mentioned was about destiny and fate.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, the vertex placement was coming to mind. And I think that's something we explored earlier this year between you and I in terms of the vertex in our charts. We kind of spoke about it personally. But I'm trying to think between destiny and fate, your soul is going to have the experience that it is always going to have when it comes down to destiny. Whereas fate, for me, I kind of see it as more like fated people, fated encounters, fated timing of things. So I feel like with destiny, it's kind of boundaryless, it's timeless in a way. Whereas fate, I feel like, has more structure and uniform. And that is something that I would maybe look at someone's vertex for because we can maybe pinpoint it a little bit.
Can you provide your definition of destiny again, if you remember
Mm,
that, so that I
yeah,
can?
do I remember? I guess like for me, destiny has no time, it has no bound, it's boundaryless, is what I was saying. But it's just whatever is going to occur in your lifespan, it will occur in your lifespan.
Whereas fate has those, you said it's got more structure that.
Yeah, more structure, more form. You can kind of like pinpoint like
Mhm.
windows of fate, for example.
And do you think the descendant also plays a role in fate? I don't know. Destiny too.
Mm.
Do you think this said yes? Actually, yes. Let's answer this. Let's unpick this question. Do you feel like the descendant plays a role? Because you mentioned the vertex, and I 100% agree, and particularly what the vertex symbolizes. And I guess also where it's placing your chart and what's going on with the activity around that vertex. But for the descendant, which, as I, in our personal conversations, I've always said that we typically don't hear about the placements that operate as the polar opposite ends of our ascendant, or the flip side of our charts. Some people might call this the shadow sides of our charts, but I call these the intimate parts. They're only those who are near and dear kind of get to see, but it's stuff that's also innately built within our cosmic blueprint. It's our DNA, and it's something that lives within our bodies and our souls. And I think when you speak about the vertex, it also makes me think about the descendant, because again, on an intimate level, I believe that the descendant are the things, or the descendant symbolizes, should I say. As we say, the ascendant is the more public facing, but I think the descendant focuses on the private spheres of our lives. And I think there is I want to say a burning fire that people who might not be close to us might not see. But these are also our values. I think it speaks to the things that we really care about. It's our heart center. Like, for example,
Yeah.
mine is in Pisces. So I do care about charitable causes. I hate to see that people are suffering in the world with poverty. There is inequality. These kind of things really they grate on my spirit. When I see that there's sadness amongst other people too. I these are causes that are, if I'm going to support a charitable cause, it's going to be things that are related to the betterment of people. And I think that's why when you speak about destiny and fate, I also would love to know from your lens, do you think the descendant plays a role in how that is activated in the chart of an individual?
I think yes, because when I think about the descendant, I feel anchored, and I feel like it's a part of our chart that can make us feel just grounded and at home. I think it's so deep, it's at the core of us. So for me, I think the closer you are to the energy or the essence of your descendant, I feel like that can activate points of fate or alignment with destiny, if you like, because it's security in some way. It's providing that ability for the soul to be at rest, I think, when we're incorporating our descendant energy. So I would say so, yes.
I like that take. Because it places you, and you spoke about, sorry, just going back to with destiny having, it's boundless. There aren't, like, fixed
Mm,
timelines in regards to that, whereas with fate,
mm,
like, things are a bit more structured, as you said, fated encounters, fated people, and so forth. And I think when you think about, as you worded your interpretation of the descendant, I'm not gonna re-say because
mm.
I'll butcher it, but when I think about this in my mind, you've placed it in a way and you've explained it in a way which it makes sense to the fated encounters, which then also propel you into destiny's path. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, I was just running through people who I know. And when I think about the energy that they project somehow without knowing, I feel their descendant. Actually, when I really think about them, I feel, I don't know, for some reason, there's a lot of mercurial descendants around me. And I
Mhm.
feel the way that they express themselves and the way that they express themselves in community and just how they make those connections. And it's a big part of like either their career,
Yes.
their brand, their business, whatever. And I feel like when they're in that energy, that's how life kind of propels forward in a way.
And you are, and as you explain the people that you've mentioned who have mercurial descendants, and that, shaping how they go about, even their career, their professional work that they do, but also
Mm,
just their social connections. And I think, when we think about the ascendant, as I always say, it's that part of our introduction to the world where we present ourselves in the ways that we would
yeah.
love to be met and shown and presented. But it's also the ways that the world meets us too. And I think, as we always say with sister signs, there is a balancing of the scales here. And I think, part of the joys of astrology is learning that life is about equilibrium and balancing the energies of those polarizing ends of the scale, and it's never abandoning those, just because, let's just say, you have a Cancer descendant, you're not going to abandon your Capricorn ascendant. Like, you need to embody both of that. And I think, you speaking about these people really at their core, they emulate that in who they
Yeah,
are and how they go about their lives. I think it's also testament to the fact that you need both ends. And I think
yeah,
both ends do play a role actually in destiny and fate and encounters, and also the role. Because if you think about, sorry, I'm going down the rabbit hole, but I really like this, that we are understanding but also representing this through the chart, although we're not looking at this solely from an astrological perspective. But
mm,
your ascendant, again, how we are presented in the world, you might meet people in the world doing what you're doing because of your ascendant, but then your descendant still plays a major role in how you go about activating the things that anchor you, as you said, because you represent that descendant as the things that ground you, the things that stabilize you. But the things that you passionately, and I think it is the causes that we really care about, it's the things that we will go to the ends of the earth to defend. And I think a lot of these people that you speak about, but also people that I can think about, they
mm,
do channel that and emulate that energy quite strongly. So yeah, I just wanted to
mm.
know whether you felt the descendant played a role in that. And I think it really does. And from your explanation, I completely understand the lens of where you're coming from too.
Yeah, and to be honest, just as you were talking, I think a massive part of what you've just said is a reflection of you having your sun moon in opposition and you constantly having to live that experience of, okay, it's not just about the sun, it's not just about the ascendant, what is also balancing, what's also anchoring the other side, and having to kind of really find where balance is across that spectrum. And I think it's through conversations with you that I've had to really kind of wrap my head around that and come to a level of understanding, which is why when you asked me that question about the descendant, I was like, yeah, of course. Like, it makes sense because I see it in your energy as well, that constant balancing act between the two and then having to find your happy place between them. So yeah, yeah.
Like that. I like the happy place routine. But I mean, don't get me wrong, you might go through the fire and get burned and scorched whilst you're trying to balance the energies, but you do ultimately, and in line with what you're saying about fate, destiny, fated encounters, but just even us, looking at past lives, there is, I think, once you reach the equilibrium, the balance, the happy space, and you realize that it's not just about abandoning one for the other. And as you mentioned, we spoke quite earlier on that you can generally have a soul connection with somebody, but also have a past life connection with somebody. But the contract might vary depending on what paths and ways you both decide to go. And as you said, you gave the example that some people might just be on board for their souls evolving, and some of them might just be like, it's a bit too soon and not feel comfortable enough to venture on that journey of evolving their souls. And that's when you have the divergences of different paths. But ultimately, you can have polarizing ends working together. It just
Mm,
depends on how deep the souls want to go together and
mm,
journey through that. And maybe not in this lifetime, but you might revisit that in another lifetime too. And that's another possibility to actually really consider and factor in. So yeah, I don't know. It feels quite like.
mm.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
guess on that, I feel like I have to ask you a follow-up question because I don't think this is something that I factored in or considered, but that point where you have met someone, doesn't matter if it's platonic, romantic, whatever, and you have the sense of, I know this person, we've done a past life together, there's that familiarity, that comfort, but then you start to feel the paths diverging and you start to think, okay, maybe not in this lifetime. I just really want to hear your thoughts around that because I feel like there's more to that. Have you experienced it? And if so, how do you make that decision and how do you make that final not in this lifetime call?
I just felt my stomach sink. And you know what?
Sorry.
I'm going to say, I don't think there is ever a stage where you make a decision as such, but
Mhm.
I think your heart will forever long for that. and I'm just speaking off my experience, your heart might not never long for the individual, but from my lens and like what I had journeyed through, I think your heart never stops longing for the individual. But I think with where you're headed, as you said, where there is that divergence in the path, I think acceptance of what could not be is a real anchor in that. I don't think there's ever a stage where you fully accept it. You might learn to just continue with life. And I think that's what I
Mhm,
have done. You know,
mhm.
you understand that you're on two different timelines, and they're not meeting in the middle. And you pick yourself up and you continue forward. But the heart is never truly the same. And I think that longing and knowing that without glamorizing or romanticizing this, knowing what she felt in the connection and how, like, you know, when you said that when you looked at that individual person's eyes and you saw what you saw and you knew, and knowing that those exact feelings still linger within your blood, but knowing that that can't progress, it's a heart-wrenching feeling. Like, it,
Yeah.
I don't think you ever entirely recover from that, if I'm being
Mm,
honest. I think you learn to just cope and you learn
yeah,
to continue forward because that's where
yeah,
your path is going. You are, and I, looking at my North Node, unfortunately, the path of the Scorpio North Node means that I do have to. I have to get stung by the scorpion sting. And I
mm,
think sometimes that means accepting that loss is part of the equation. I was going to say losing people and letting go, but loss is something that I've had to become acquainted with, even when it's not on my own terms. And I think
yeah,
that there's nothing that really prepares you for that. I think, if anything, it's quite traumatic because it's like you had desired, or your soul, your emotions, your feelings had desired a certain outcome, and then boom, poof, in the air it goes. So I think there's
mhm,
a lot of, but I think through that and through the experience that I've gone through, I think I've gone on to understand why our souls had to part, like why our
yeah,
souls had to cross and path and meet. But I also understood that it would form some of the ways I would express and storytell my experiences
mhm,
too. Yeah.
mhm.
I don't know if I've even answered what you've asked.
You
I,
have,
yeah.
you have, and actually, like quite beautifully as well, because what really stood out for me, even though it was, painful and it's, not the easiest experiences to go through, what stood out was you saying, like, almost you had to affirm and give yourself the validation that that soul recognition was real, and like,
Mhm.
to not gaslight yourself about that experience, and to be like, okay, even though it didn't quote go well,
Yes.
it doesn't mean that that wasn't a past life connection. It doesn't mean that we didn't have a path together at some point.
Hmm.
And just knowing that it did happen, it was real, and that feeling was real, because I think you can almost gaslight yourself into saying, well, it didn't end up in the way that my mind thought it would end up, therefore it's not real. It wasn't real. We didn't have all of those intense feelings and like love, connection. I think we can easily do that as humans. So it was nice for me to hear you say that no, that feeling was real, but our paths just needed to go separate.
And I think, you mentioning that part about, not gaslighting yourself, I think it's also in a world, we speak about the digital age and the fact that we live in a world where it's great that we all are sharing our opinions and our thoughts, but there can also be this demonization that occurs when, you believe, and you're the person that's experiencing the thing, you believe that you are in a connection where there has been a past life there, and
Yeah.
you have, I guess, mentors or people who are of a certain status in this I'm going to say community that we're in, who I don't want to say frown upon, but
Mm.
demonize the fact that if a soul contract or a certain path life contract doesn't take form in a certain path or way, then it's just invalidated. And I like that you have reinforced that no, it's not invalidated. Yes, it didn't occur in the ways that it should have, or the ways that you desired, or the ways that your heart desired for it to do so. But this does not take away from the genuine things that have occurred in that connection, and it doesn't make it less of a connection than ones that have have reap the rewards and are bountiful, and they're fruitful. And I think that's important, that like really well important that you have highlighted that. So thank you.
But I actually don't, I don't think I shared that reflection from a space of like altruism or knowing, because I have, I'm sitting in a position where I've had a past life connection, paths diverged, and then they met again. So I'm saying that because in that moment of separation, I did gaslight myself and think, oh, it wasn't true then. We didn't share a past life. Everything that I saw was just false. Like, what did you say? I just cancelled it out. And I really like, I told myself that, maybe I told myself that to kind of cope and to heal in that period of time. But it's only now, having the paths meet again, that I think that actually gaslighting yourself in those moments perhaps isn't healthy, because like you're just lying to yourself effectively.
And
Yeah.
let me ask, does the lying help to make it feel better to yourself? Or,
Mm,
yeah, let me just leave, is in terms of, because you mentioned in that precise moment of time and upon reflection, you're asking yourself, was it right for me to have like gaslit myself and tell myself that these things weren't true and weren't valid? But why do we as human beings do this when we are in those situations where it hasn't, where the paths have diverged? What do you think is one of the core reasons why we tell ourselves that something isn't what it was, when we know that we've experienced what we've experienced?
I think it's that, like, it's Disney syndrome, where we all feel like every experience that we have is supposed to end in a fairy tale. And I think it's the societal thing of believing that every relationship or every encounter that we have will be beautiful and will be magical and whimsical, and it will have all of the ingredients of your classic Walt Disney. So I think it is a part of that why we kind of, yeah, end up in, we tie ourselves in knots because of it, really and truly.
Yeah, you're not lying. You definitely aren't lying. But
Mm,
even if things don't turn out whimsical or lovey-dovey, this does
mm,
not validate your experience. Your experience of that soul connection or past life connection is just as valid as something that would have blossomed and fully come into fruition. And I think that's
yeah.
important to remember, that not all endings have the happy ending, even when our souls and our bodies and our spirits desire for that to take place.
Hmm. It's true. But you know what though? There was something that you said earlier that I like have to go back to. You were talking about, I guess, the spiritual community and like how things can be invalidated or demonized. And you reminded me that I haven't mentioned twin flames. And I feel like that's the thing that gets really, almost, you get heckled for it in a way. There's like communities where they'll beat you up if you talk about twin flames, and others were like, no, this is the gold standard. So I guess I'd love to know for you, like, what do you think about twin flames? How do they differ?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I know a whole bunch about Tim Flames. I think for me, I've never categorized things as, I've literally just looked at things as, like, as you said, soul connections, past lives, and
Yeah.
that. Like, I've never gone down. I guess to some extent, if I'm being honest, I think I have been influenced, should I say, by the demonization of that term in the fields that the people that I follow and the spaces I'm in. So I can't sit here, but from what I know about Tim Flames, I guess there's this like two people meeting together, very much deeply connected, like you could say, past life connections, soul life connections, and all of the things that we have discussed. But sometimes they are evolving together, and other times they are going through troubles in which both of them have to work through together in order to, have this union that makes them twins. And it's the union of flames. Now, I do believe that if we're looking at it at its core, stripping away its title and all these things, I think things like this do exist. I do believe there are people that not everyone's going to come prepped and, have done the internal work. Sometimes in the partnership, you're going to have to do the internal work with the person. Now,
Mm,
depending on the severity of what you're experiencing or the triggers and so forth, that's each to their own. Like me, are never going to come and advise you and say, okay, cool. If you're going through this, then you must endure and stay through this. But you know what you're dealing with. I think everybody, to some extent, in these connections, though, might be deeply bound together. Like the soul tie is real in these connections. And from
mm,
what I've briefly read about them and what people have shared from their experiences, some people have found success. Some people, they are in twin flame unions, and other people, they say, I want to say, I don't want to say demonizing things, but they have shared their thoughts. Now, for me, I think I'm conflicted because I don't think I've given myself the opportunity to accept the concept without, like
mhm,
you said, that being branded or welded out or being seen as that you're woozy. But like from us having this discussion and thinking about the things I know as a skeleton argument, I would say that I think it is possible for these unions to exist. As
yeah,
to what degree, I think it depends on like the people's charts. I think it depends on their temperaments. I think it depends on a whole range of factors. But if
mhm.
we're looking at things such as, soul ties, soul connections, past lives, I think we can't say these things exist and then deny that. Yeah. I
True, true.
but I
Yeah.
don't know, where do you stand on the line with this?
It's a good, I think you've made very good and valid points. I think I struggle with it. I believe in it, but I also struggle with it
Hmm.
because I don't believe, like, I think the concept is like these two people are one soul. And
Okay.
I can't wrap my head around one person having half of a soul. Like, I just don't think we come into this earth to have half of a soul and to be made whole from another person. My personal belief is I can't subscribe to that. I also struggle because I wonder how much it reinforces trauma bonding and how much it encourages people to stay in situations where they might be best placed to leave. Um, so yeah, I believe in some of it, but my concerns are greater than my belief when it
Please.
comes to this. Yes. So yeah, that was a massive segue. Astrology and past lives.
I know that we have briefly touched on, some of the points of or the angles in a chart that could indicate um fate and destiny. But I know that, when we look at past life connections, be it romantic, with family or with friends, I was really thinking about this one, as I haven't, I think in a personal discussion with Mimi, I just haven't been on top of my A game when it comes to the transit and the astro. So, forgive us if we're not on the ball with this one. But I think I was looking at this. There definitely has to be something related to these core planets. I think there has to be an influence of the sun. I think there has to be an influence of the moon. I would love to believe also, how I speak quite passionately about them. I think the nodes to these planets,
Mhm,
this is romantic, familial, friendships. I think even with the guessing the sisterhood and synastry, how we looked how deep their sisterhood went with some of these artists and like black creatives, a lot of them had like Sun to Venus synastry or Sun to
mhm,
Jupiter synastry. There'd be Moon synastry here, but I think if I'm looking more so at past life indicators, I want to see what's going on with your moon, what planets are sitting on your moon. Like, for example, with
yeah,
the connection I had, the person's Saturn was on my moon. I've had Pluto on my moon with another individual. I know we typically hear of the nodes, so like the south node and the north node being on these, but again, when you're looking at things that are of the past that are reminding you of things that have happened in previous lifetimes, we can't ignore these important points of the moon. And I think if you have the north node, for example, sitting on somebody's Jupiter, that could speak to, again, depending on the other factors of a chart, that could speak to the forward movement of what this lifetime is presenting to them, and the
mhm,
beliefs and, the path to faith that they might encounter in their connection. And that could be romantic, it could be friendship, it could be, familial. I think about with family, in as much as this, some people might term this as karmic. And I know, again, as we're speaking about past lives, some people refer to some of these placements as karmic placements that are indicators of you having past life connections with people. I think in an individual chart, if you were to have the sun and the moon, for example, making contact, be this the opposition, it could even be the square. I think this could speak to the tensions that lie in the family, the bond between the mother and the father, but this could also go deeper to the family connections that exist within your bloodline. And I think, therefore, it's hard to pinpoint specific planets as such, because I think there are a range of planets, even the planets that you perhaps might not see, like Mercury, for example. I think if Mercury is making an aspect to the moon, it could actually speak to the ways that you guys telepathically understand each other. There could be an innate understanding without you even having to say vocally, vocalize, but this could be a safe space for you as well. And that might not on the books look like a past life indicator, but maybe that person understands your emotional needs. Maybe that person can read in between the lines and is able to give you wise counsel, is able to see beneath your soul. And that's why I think 100% though, I would stand on the sun, I would stand on the moon. I'm going to say Jupiter too. I want to say, like, in as much as we don't hear about Saturn in past life connections and synastry, I think it does play a big role. And that can even be Saturn. Let's just say Saturn is sitting on Venus. Perhaps there has been a past life connection where there has been control around the finances, control around how money is dealt with, financial abuse to some extent. It could indicate some of the ways that you are restrained or restricted. But then also, it could also illustrate and that's more so on the heavier side. If we're looking on the lighter side of, like, let's just say Saturn is making a harmonious aspect to, like, it could be a trine, it could be a conjunction to Venus. That could just be somebody who might be slightly older than you. Again, I think Saturn can represent, maturity. It can represent I don't want to say the elderly, so let me not word it like that, but those who embody mature energy, those who are, they come with big daddy energy. Let me just word it as that. And you have that in an aspect with Venus. For example, that person might come into your life and help you get your stuff in order. They might help you get your financial stuff in order. They might help you get a routine and a schedule in order. And perhaps in a previous lifetime, that person might have been a wise counsel to you. They might have been an authoritative figure to you. So I think there are many ways in which the planets can be assessed and analyzed to illustrate that. But I think for me, if I'm going to rank things that really, really indicate that, I want to say the moon, I want to say the nodes, I want to say Saturn, and to some extent, traditional astrologers might not agree with me, but if we're putting in Neptune and Pluto into the mix as well, I think you can also consider those. But these are obviously outer planets. So again, if they're not making aspects to some of your personal planets, I might be like, if for example, if your Neptune is conjunct another person's Neptune, you're probably slightly from the same generation. So I'm not going to say take that into consideration. But let's say if Neptune was sitting on your moon, if Neptune was sitting on your sun, if Neptune was sitting on your IC, if Neptune was sitting on your MC, your IC being the parts of your soul that make you feel at home, make you feel, I want to say it's the parts of us that make us feel secure and grounded. As you said, with the descendant, that's the anchor. The fourth house, typically not in everyone's chart, but the IC sits at the lower part of the chart. It can be placed in other parts of the chart depending on where you were born in the world. But I think if you have it in the lower parts of your chart, for example, I'll take myself, mine's in the fourth house. I know that when I come across people who sit on my IC, they automatically, whether that's the sun, whether that's the moon, whether that's Jupiter, there is that sense of, yeah, we're doing life because you're here to help me unravel my call for expression and freedom. So I think when you're looking at this analysis, it's important to not look at the chart independently, but look at it and assess it holistically, and understand that each planet could indicate certain things. But some of the key ones that I've mentioned, like Saturn, the moon, the nodes, the sun, they might take a bit more precedence when you're looking at, indicators of past life connections with people in your family, your relationships and friendships. So yeah, hopefully that's made sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about mine and my son's chart,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh, is this past or is this future? And kind of like
Yeah.
going between the two, because I don't know if you've noticed this, or have you, if you've observed this, where you'll have similar placements within family groups. I don't know if you've ever come across that. So my son and I have the same Mercury and Saturn, off the top of my head that I can remember.
Okay. Oh.
And there's other things that kind of where we meet, I suppose, with his Aquarian energy. But I always look at him and I think that's so interesting. But it, like, I can understand our Mercury's because I look at the way that he communicates, and
Hmm.
his dad says it as well, like how intuitive he is with his expression, like his intuitive intelligence supersedes his intelligence overall. But he's a very smart kid, so it's mind blowing to even think of that. But then I wonder if that's a past commonality that we have, or is it part of our future evolution in a way? And I think it kind of borders on both in a way.
I want to say it, but I think so. To answer your first question, I love the fact that you are somebody who likes to explore family astrology, and I think
Mm,
it's quite interesting. I am somebody who likes to pull up the charts of people, even if they're not here anymore, past
yeah,
relatives, with the
yeah.
little information I have to like make up the missing pieces. So I think that's really cool that you do that. And secondly, I do think the expression of Mercury conjuncting your Saturn is definitely it's dual in nature. And that's one thing that people, once you look at astrology outside of the lens of, okay, these are the hot take planets. And if you have these planets in your chart, you're going to be celebrity. When you look at astrology as a tool for understanding human behavior, you
Mm,
realize that there is duality in most aspects, in most planets. And that's why I say that it's hard to just sit here and say that this one is a
yeah.
key indicator, because as you're saying, that intuitive ability to understand and like communicate intuitively, but the mind process behind your Mercury's meeting with, Saturn, and that being in the sign of Aquarius, and you both belong to that, he came from your bloodline,
Mm,
I think to me, that speaks of the forward, but also the past versions of yourself. I think that speaks to
yeah.
the soul part, the fact that, your son is able to do that without you even having to, like, him being intelligent is one thing, but then
Mhm.
that, sorry, English word, the intuitive ability to communicate those things behind that thought process. And I think Mercury deals with the mind quite heavily, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's really the heart and the gut speaking to the mind quite heavily. And I think when you have Saturn there, that is that guided, like when you are giving the authority, you're not coming down in the path of, like, your Saturn is obviously in Aquarius, right? I don't
Mhm.
think you come down in the sense of the traditional authoritative person that I'm the parent and you must listen and obey the authority. You come from the lens of, let's openly communicate here.
Yeah,
How?
yeah, yeah.
And I think your style, like just knowing you as a person, your style of parenting is very much like, we are, yes, there, I am, your mother. Yes, respect is definitely earned in that sense, but I
Mm,
am here as your friend above everything else. And I think that's how, when I think about Saturn being with Mercury, it's like I'm guiding you, but there is gentle guidance here. I'm not
mhm.
guiding you from the lens of just being authority. And I realize that your intellect, yes, it is within you naturally, it's innate within you, but you also have the intuitive ability. You have that within you. And I do see how you nurture that and you guide that. So I think it's a bit of forward and also the present and the past blended
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
And it's yeah, it's crazy when you see in someone's chart, or sorry, a synastry chart, where you can see the blend of both the past and the future, and how it's that constant balancing act between the two. Um, I was thinking about the future kind of aspects of how you would know, I guess, if someone is part of your soul agreement or contract. And I think very similar to yourself, Emily, the sun and the moon, I can't not mention those because they do illuminate and they do shine, whether it's an external or an internal light. And I feel like those are quite not intimate parts of us, but we're so closely connected, I think, to our sun and our moon, that it would highlight when you encounter somebody else's energy how compatible you are on your path of progression, that path of evolution, if there is some sort of harmony going on between the sun and the moon. Yeah.
And as you were saying that, outside of like this discussion, when we look at like, I guess your starter pack into romance astrology, which a lot of us are into, I'm into that stuff. Synastry is really big here. Like people, as you're saying, compatibility is assessed by, okay,
Yeah.
do your sun signs conflict? Are they opposing each other? Are they in harmonious? Are they trining each other? Are they working against each other? And I think you are very right that it is something that is a high, and especially when you think about forward movement, the future sense, it is something that is a high consideration. So I just want to say,
Massive,
yeah.
massive. But also, when you do have squares, I think, like, let's take it for suns, I do think that can push you to your future self as well, whether we like it or not,
Yeah.
because it does bring up parts of us that we might not want to acknowledge or that we're not quite ready to face. And through having a square with someone else in the sun position or Mercury even, it can push you to it breaks you in a way that you have no choice but to level up. So I do kind of see that as it can be a part of your future soul agreement. And yeah, it might be difficult, but it's a good thing eventually. I think also I mentioned the vertex for future kind of soul agreements or contracts that you might have. And the vertex is more about that fate aspect rather than destiny. So points of time or windows of fate that you might encounter people, situations, experiences where you might have an activation of just coming into destiny's alignment or fate's alignment rather. So looking at your vertex as well as kind of what planets might be amplifying your vertex. So other way around. So as your vertex moves around your chart, it might be amplifying, say, your sun or your midheaven and highlighting someone who might enhance your future career prospects, for example. So the vertex is something that I'd love to mention. My last one, this is more from a personal experience, and I'd love to get your thoughts. How do I describe it? So, we've obviously spoken about the North Node and South Node. I've had an encounter where someone's South Node conjuncts my North Node, and therefore the other way around. So their South Node my South Node conjuncts their North Node.
Okay, say that again.
And
So your south node conjuncts their north node, and their say that, and
their
their north node.
conjuncts my
Sure.
South Node. And
Yeah.
there's many other harmonious aspects within our chart. It's, again, like loads of conjunctions actually. But I noticed with this South Node, North Node, that there is something very, I don't even know if I can say mystical, but there's just this understanding of, okay, that we know we're about to do something. It's cool. It's cool. It's coming. It's in. And there's just this knowing that our paths have met for a reason, and that wherever it's heading to somewhere great.
The south node and the north node meeting. Do you know what?
Mm.
Wherever we're headed to somewhere great. Sorry, I'm just going to piggyback off that because when we typically hear about the south node, I can't lie. When I first started researching this point of the moon, I was very scared because a lot of it was very much doom and gloom. We're almost taught and told that we must abandon the South Node to some extent to get to the North Node. I think it's actually quite. I'm going to say I don't. I like. I think I'm going to have to use the word demonized actually. When I think about how the South Node is described, like oftentimes this is described as the toxic behaviors, the traits we need to leave behind, the things that
True.
are, the shadow sides of us. And it's like, as you're saying though, there can be a meeting in the middle where the North Node and the South Node come together to move you into destiny's path, the path that is the path forward for you. And I think
Mhm.
that is like you explaining that and that happening to you in that experience where both of you experienced that. Yes, this does not mean that none of you had to, not go through some painful lessons to get to where you are or,
Yeah.
to move forward to where you need to go to. But your paths cross and in some shape or way, your hearts, your mind, your souls never really stayed the same after that experience. And I think that's what one of the things about the nodes is that like you don't ever stay the same. As you mentioned, Mimi, there is an evolution of growth that happens, even when sometimes you might not want it. But you talking about the South Node and the North Node meeting, and in wider discussions in the astro world, there often being that, association of the South Node being this toxic thing that you need to leave behind, and the North
Mm.
Node like Destiny's Path, which yes, we understand, and I do agree, it is Destiny's Path, but so is the South Node. Because if we're looking at
Yeah.
Destiny, we're not looking at that in isolation. And you having that experience on both ends, like both individuals having that in a synastry chart, I think is very powerful. And it illustrates that you don't need to abandon one to get to the other. Ultimately, both of them need to work together. So yeah, I think that's very crazy.
Yeah, and I think one of the common things that we say to each other is how much we learn from one another, and how it's just this, it's effortless in terms of the growth, the natural, the organic way that it feels, but there's no hierarchy, and it's just a case of, damn, I didn't know that. Thanks for telling me that. And oh yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And it just been a constant flow of learning. So yeah, it's. I just thought I wanted to mention it because I think it's quite interesting.
It's really rare. Like I don't think I've heard anybody have.
Mm,
I've not met tons and tons of people, but just like
mm.
people that I know, no, that's a very rare aspect to have in the synastry chart. I can't lie.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of other placements in common as well, so it's quite creepy actually when you look at our charts.
Well,
But there was something that you mentioned. I wanted to kind of ask you about free will versus predetermination and
oh God.
circumstances. Where do you stand on free will?
I do believe that we ultimately, and I think irrespective of what religion or what belief system you follow, in most texts there is an understanding that we have been given the opportunity, we have been given the tools, should I say, in our human form to explore things and to make decisions about things that we seek to do, right? And I think that in as much as there are things that are so as I'm speaking, what I'm hearing is destiny is not denied, but it can be delayed. And I
Mhm.
think that, when you have the ability to some extent, tamper and buy yourself some time, whether that's through a result of your behaviors, actions, doing things that you've done, I think that essentially, yes, free will can tamper uh, along the way of your path, should I say. And it might derail you, but nothing's really necessarily derailing you anyway, but it might detour you off the intended path that you have, for example. However, you will ultimately end up there if it's predetermined and it's predestined for you. Because as you said with
Yeah.
fate, these are things that are like more structured. There are timelines that are set, window frames that are set for you to achieve certain things. You might
Mhm.
miss a particular window frame at one time in your life, but you might be called to revisit that 8 years down the line, 5 years down the line. I think if you think about the nodes, your nodal return and your reverse nodal happens at 18 and a half. You then go through it again, 27 and a half, 28. there are time frames in which that you might have been killing yourself, having the time of your life, doing things that might not necessarily be beneficial to your soul, but they might be feeding your physical vessel. But come your reverse nodal, you're going to be propelled into fated encounters that are going to ask you, respected all the choices that you've been able to make on your own will. Because again, even your guides, whatever system you believe in, whether you believe in religious systems, whether you believe in traditional systems, the creator, God, and the universe around you and your ancestors, they're going to let you do things. They don't come here and say, hey, you're not going to do this. No, they will let you
Mhm.
do what you want to do. But as
Yeah.
when you come into a fated encounter or fated window, aka your reverse nodal or your nodal turn, there are going to be times in which you are going to be brought to question. And I think there are going to be things that you won't be able to derail from, even if you have rerouted your path months beforehand or years beforehand and you've done things that haven't necessarily aligned you with your true calling in this lifetime. So I think, yes, things are predetermined. I do believe that free will plays a role in how we, eventually end up in our paths. But ultimately, destiny is not denied. It can only simply be delayed, in my own opinion. Yeah. Hopefully that
Yeah.
answers. This feels very
I love
philosophical.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to describe it. I also wanted to touch on like why some people remember their past lives and why people don't, and how we can kind of access them if we want to. And I guess like one of the first things that pops out for me, you just might not have a belief system or value system that aligns with past lives, and that's okay. Like that will shape the way that you view some of these esoteric, otherworldly kind of principles. And for some people, they just simply don't believe in it, and that's okay. But the other side of it is you might have you might have blocks or barriers within or from your past lives that are so deep or so entrenched that it places like a film on the way that you view things in this lifetime. Therefore, it can be quite difficult to remember your past lives. I feel like that certainly happened to me. And when I started to explore my past lives, I started to understand why I couldn't see it as clearly, or why it felt a bit more distant in terms of like being able to access kind of these esoteric knowledge. But um, I think sometimes it's a form of protection as well, why you don't remember your past lives. And maybe you just also agreed to have a human experience. And again, that's fine. Like, we don't have to remember or access all of these otherworldly tools and knowledges. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know, I'm going to kind of contradict myself. I was going to say it doesn't necessarily dictate or shape the way that your life is going to go. It's not a be all and end all, because if things are going to go the way that they're going to go in terms of your destiny or fate, it's going to happen anyway. But if you are someone who is curious, there are a variety of ways that you can access your past lives. You can go to a past life regression therapist and access your past life in that way. And that's not someone telling you what they think that you have done in your past life. You are guided into a meditation and you are taken through several doors, and you are asked to explore what's behind the doors. And you are the one that's recalling from your soul what you have seen through those doors. And that's a representation of your past life. But you're doing that in a meditative state. You can also get past life readings. So I think different psychics, mediums, readers, whatever, they can offer past lives and readings and look into that with your consent and with your assistance. Dreams is another way. If you ever have recurring dreams, I think that can give you cues and indicators as to what experiences that you might have had in a past life. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would include in that.
Think you've included, like, I'm just like wowed. So guys, I have to say I'm always wowed by Mimi's knowledge of these areas, deeper areas of life. And I think that just as you've been speaking today, I'm like, damn, you're onto the money here. But I honestly wanted to also say that as you're listing some of the ways in which somebody can unlock those memories, you speak about blocks. And I think, I've often said to you, I think I have blocks because there's certain things I just
Mm,
don't remember. How would you also advise somebody who might be curious? As we said,
mm,
curiosity is a key ingredient here to unlocking some of these principles. For some people, as you mentioned, they just might never venture down this because this isn't something
yeah.
that they subscribe to, and that's perfectly fine. But for those who might be curious to adventure and unlock certain blocks, how
Mm,
can they do so in a safe manner that still, because again, it might be something that they're not new to, they're something that they're new to, sorry, something that they might not
yeah.
be familiar with, but like, as you mentioned, there's certain things that might be blocked for a reason. So how might
Yeah.
somebody who is curious after listening to this and listening to you here, like explain some of the ways in which you can unlock these memories, how can they do so safely and ethically?
I would definitely say the tools that I mentioned, specifically a past life regression therapist, can help because you are doing it with the guidance and assistance of someone who is trained, particularly to deal with anything that might come up that's quite traumatic. But even if before you get to that point, I guess maybe consider what fears you have around that, what triggers you might have around that. So, for example, I use the example of me having a fear around dogs. I really had to explore in this physical lifetime, has anything happened? What responses do I have to a dog? And I saw a hypnotherapist first to explore that. And that was really helpful for me because at that point, I didn't understand why or what it was about dogs. And effectively, what came up was that it was everything about dogs. It was the fur, it was the way that they moved in unexpected ways, it was the teeth, it was seeing their rib cage, it was everything, everything. And so that information was so useful for me because I understood, okay, this is beyond the physical experience because it's a myriad of things. So choose someone who has adequate and safe training to explore your fears from a physical human perspective first, or your experiences, before diving into the esoteric realms, I would say.
Perfect. Love that.
Yeah.
So over to past lives and soul groups and families. And I think we did speak about this before when Mimi gave her example about, just how she views soul connections more so from the collective lens as opposed to just solely the romantic lens. Again, that could be just down to her beliefs. But why do some of us, and why might some of us actually reincarnate with people and have a more challenging circumstance with them in this lifetime? And I think,
Mm,
when we think about this in terms of challenging experiences, think about whatever scenarios that you want to, or whatever comes to mind for yourself. But typically, when I hear about challenging circumstances and scenarios and reincarnation into family groups, I think about the home and I think about the family. That's typically some of the first starting places where we experience these,
mm,
some people call them childhood traumas, where we experience these inequalities, where we experience the indifference treatments. And I think, the reason why some of us, even though my brain's not entirely here today, guys, one thing I will say in regards to why some of us might choose to come back, even though on a physical level, it emotionally hurts us. It psychologically changes the way that we view ourselves and the connections around us. And mentally, we embody scars that were never really our own in the first place. But some reasons why, and one of the key reasons I would like to say, is the fact that we know that we are the cycle breakers. And in as
mm,
much, and I do have a belief, maybe I'm being philosophical and utopian here, but I have a belief that we are shown to some extent before we reincarnate into this lifetime. We are shown our path of destiny. We are shown some of the not so pleasant, but also the pleasant things that we're here to accomplish and achieve. And I think when we see a bloodline, and the story, I just, visualizing this in my head, it's like you're watching something on a cinema screen. You're seeing how the story is unfolding, and you know that this bloodline needs saving. You know that you embody the tools, the resilience, the character to overcome some of these things for your bloodline, even though it does not come without strife or trouble. I think this is one of the key reasons why some people tend to reincarnate into the same family line again and again, because they're here to dismantle the systems that are
Mm,
in place. They're here to dismantle the outdated ways that hold back the bloodline. And I think this could also be from some of us are here to do that spiritually. So some of us are here to be the generational cycle breakers from
mm,
outdated spiritual practices that keep our bloodlines restricted from
yeah.
reverence to the people and the traditional ways that came before us. Some of us are here to emancipate our bloodlines through being financial, I want to say breadwinners, successors,
Mm, mm,
achievers. And there has been, you might see that in this particular bloodline, there is a story of poverty. Like poverty is systemic here, and it's actually very much absolute. It's, I want to say to some extent, it's generational here. But
mm,
you know that you have the spirit, the willpower, the gifts that you've been given from the ethers to come here and be a cycle breaker and be that person that changes that chain of events. I think some of us know that the task and the mission is heavy. And I don't think that we entirely understand it. Like, I think we might be shown a preview, and I think this is just me, hypothesizing. You might view it differently, but I think when our souls choose the particular groups that we reincarnate with, and I'm speaking more so in terms of family, we might understand that it's not going to be easy, but the actual reality of the physical experience might take a toll on us. But our spirits never die. And I think that's why you find these people, even though they have endured the most, they know that they have a role to play in that bloodline. And even if it takes them on a different path, as we said, there could be a divergence where it's like you're going left and the other person's going right. But your soul knows that you still need to accomplish this for your bloodline. And you're not doing this because you're here to people please and you're here to do all of these other things, but you're here to emancipate and liberate your bloodline. So I think that's one of the key reasons why some of us gravitate, reincarnate, choose certain souls within the familial networks. I think there also could be with friendships. These people could be your wise counsels. I think these are generally, you could have friends that, you know what, you bonded so deep in another lifetime that you can't, you just physically, your soul cannot even comprehend you not coming back to this lifetime without them being in your circle. And you might have gone miles apart. Again, as we said, like when you have lived different lives, and you lived through different lifetimes, you might have been, let's just say in one lifetime you was a farmer, the next lifetime you were, you were a princess, or you was a king, or you were a queen, you were the monarchy. In another lifetime you were a trader, trading across globes and different parts of the continent. But in each and every lifetime, this particular soul, this particular friend has been a wise counsel to you. Damn sure for hell well, I know I'm coming back to get that one friend in the next lifetime that I'm in. So I think there are people who are familiar and are able to guide us through life. And it's not just like wise mentors and elders and like, people of a particular status or level. These are our people who we can lean on, and they just get it. They understand, like they can provide us wise counsel. And that counsel doesn't just come from just the knowledge or the textbooks that they've read. It comes from deep within their soul. Like I have friends who I know, and I often call Mimi a wise cat or a wise friend, because there's just knowledge that she spits that comes from deeper within her soul. And we have crossed paths in a previous lifetime where it's like you have, and we might not know it necessarily. You might have a friend that you go together so bad, and you don't even know why you go together so bad, but behind the physical, there's the spiritual aspect to your union. And that's why, I said with soul ties, with the whole twin flame union thing, although I don't know too much about it, I think soul ties are very real. And I do believe in that principle. And, equally so with friendships, I think there are soul ties that bind us to certain friends. And, although some of them might be challenging, because again, you might be facing a whole range of issues this lifetime that you're here to deal with that are in your chart. For example, some of us might be dealing with maternal wounds. So our relationship with others might not necessarily be as smooth, or we might be dealing with familial wounds, which mean that we don't know how to necessarily operate with receiving love sometimes. we might also want to possess and be overly bearing, which makes the connection quite stifling. And I want to say, to some extent, challenging for the others who might not necessarily come from that lens. They might not necessarily understand your experience because that's not their story. But I think
Mm,
in the middle, where we said, where there's a balance, where there's an equilibrium, you come together to meet. And I think, as I said, in being wise counsel, this doesn't always mean that you're going to be in agreement. You might have times where you disagree. You might have times where there's tension. You might have times in this lifetime where you're in friendship groups where you learn that people pleasing is not part of your story. And you might have to learn the hard way. You might have to learn in your present reincarnation state that you are just too much of a nice person and there has to be a limit. And in order for you to learn that limit, people are going to have to take advantage of your limits. And that might be through the example of friendships and friendship circles. And I think we had our Kirsty on in episode 12. And, one of the things that spoke through on her chart, which we spoke about in the episode, just not having the freedom to express how she truly feels amongst friendship groups when she was younger. And that was something that she shared that was actually real and true to her life story. That, through certain wounds that are evident through her chart, she has had to learn and gravitate through the experiences that she had that weren't so nice to eventually find the people who support her, who are women. And, that was one thing that stood out quite a lot, that there was wounding with women, there was wounding with the maternal. And I think through those areas of friendship, you tend to find out more about your own wounding and a reflection of how you can heal yourself too. So I think it's through growth, because again, the soul is coming here to grow. I mean, some souls are here, they've decided that this is it. I'm not here to grow and I'm here to just, live the human experience and that's it.
mm,
Those of
mm.
us that choose to reincarnate with a purpose, I do believe that growth is inevitably part of the non-negotiables. And I think that's why
Mm.
some of us might be in challenging circumstances where it's like, this is hurting me on an emotional level. This is hurting me psychologically, mentally, emotionally, financially, even. It might be
Mm.
hurting physically, even. But through those experiences, there's room for you to evolve and grow and gravitate towards that which is actually aligned with your path. So I hope I've answered that in a way that
Yeah,
is easy to understand. Yeah.
I actually think that's a really powerful place for us to land, like taking that thought of maybe we incarnated into difficult circumstances because we are the cycle breakers.
I would like to say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It's been a pleasure to discuss past lives, soul connections, and everything in between. And, we, as always, would really love to hear your thoughts, whether you've had any past life connections and what stood out to you as you listen to this recording. And if any memories, past life memories, things that are fragmented in your heart, your soul, and your spirit have come to mind. And we would also love for you to look out for a written piece that would accompany this episode as a result of what we've discussed, and is a written reflection that you can find on our Substack by simply searching at Two Mutables in a Pod on Substack. And lastly, you can find us on TikTok. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Facebook. So until next time, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you soon.